My wife Eleanor was lying in the ICU, fighting for her life second by second. The steady rhythm of the ventilator was the only proof she was still here. But just outside that door I heard Grant, my son, whispering to his wife, "How much longer do we have to pretend we're grieving before we can get our hands on that collection?" The way they spoke, it sounded like Eleanor was already gone. That was the moment I made my decision. But before I go on with this story, please tap subscribe to follow my journey to reclaim justice, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Now, where should I begin? Maybe with the ring. The ring, yes. Everything began with the ring. Eleanor's 40th anniversary wedding ring. I was standing in the hallway of St. Jude Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut. Cold, white, fluorescent lights washed over the ICU wing. This place never knew peace. Only the clicking of machines, the steady beeping, and the sharp smell of antiseptic that clung to you like a memory you couldn't erase. I had grown used to sitting on that hard plastic chair, staring at the wall clock. It had been 10 days since Eleanor suffered a brain aneurysm. 10 days of her lying there, motionless. 10 days where every second felt like torture. Grant and Chloe arrived. Not together, but they met in the waiting area. Chloe wore a fur coat, far too glamorous for a hospital. Grant still looked polished, like he had just stepped out of an investment bank office in Manhattan. I leaned against the cold brick wall, trying to gather myself after being allowed 5 minutes with my wife. Then I heard Chloe whisper. That nasal voice of hers always grated on me. She was holding a high-end home architecture magazine. "I've looked through it, Grant. Your mom's old Tudor-style house really doesn't fit New Canaan anymore. We should sell it immediately. Say we need cash for medical expenses. It's the perfect excuse," Grant replied, calm, calculated, without emotion. "I know. But the sanctuary is a trust asset. Dad has to sign. And with Mom like this, Dad is very easy to influence." Easy to influence. That phrase echoed in my head. They didn't see my pain. They only saw me as an obstacle, one that could be pushed aside. I swallowed the anger rising in my chest. Men my age are often ignored, treated as weak. So I stayed silent. I listened. I wanted to know just how far my son's greed would go. The moment with the ring happened when I decided to return to the ICU. I stepped softly into the room where Eleanor lay. The dim glow of the heart monitor cast shadows across her pale face. I saw Grant leaning over her bed. At first I thought he was whispering something loving. He wasn't. His hand wasn't holding his mother's hand. It was sliding carefully under her second wedding ring, the one I gave her for our 40th anniversary. A simple platinum band, but full of meaning. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse, heavier than I expected. Grant startled. The ring slipped from his fingers, clinking sharply against the metal bed rail. He quickly picked it up, his hands shaking. "Dad, I'm worried. She's worn it so long. What if someone steals it? It's very valuable. I thought it should be kept safe. In the home safe." I looked straight into his eyes. Grant looked away. I knew it was a cheap lie. He wasn't afraid of theft. He was appraising it, sorting through his own mother's belongings like items in an estate sale. I held out my hand. It trembled, but I kept it steady. "Give it to me, Grant." He placed the ring in my palm. It was still warm from Eleanor's hand. My throat tightened. I said nothing. Slowly, carefully, I slipped the ring onto my own ring finger. It was a little loose. That didn't matter. I would keep it. "No one touches anything that belongs to your mother anymore," I said. My voice was cold now, firm, carrying the weight of 62 years of life and disappointment I had kept buried. Grant didn't argue. He lowered his head, wearing a mask of false remorse, but I had seen it. Raw greed. In that moment, the last remaining trust I had in my son shattered. Soon after, I pushed past the exhaustion and grief. Grant had left a document on the table, a temporary financial power of attorney. A clever move. If I signed it, Grant would control our accounts, the stocks, and most importantly, the trust, all under the excuse that his father was too grief-stricken to make decisions. I looked at the papers, then I looked at my wife, lying there in silence. I understood my responsibility. I didn't call Grant. I didn't argue. I picked up the phone and called our family attorney, Thomas Vance. Thomas, I said, keeping my voice steady, hiding the tremor, I need you to prepare an emergency trust codicil. I want this done at 9 in the morning tomorrow. At your office. Not at home. And no one, especially Grant, can know about this appointment. That was the moment I officially declared war. Not to reclaim wealth, but to protect Eleanor's dignity and her legacy. And I would not allow my own son to destroy everything for the sake of bottomless greed. I swear I would see this through. I walked out of the hospital, Eleanor's ring resting in my hand. Cold, lifeless, and yet it gave me a new kind of strength. I knew I couldn't act on impulse. I couldn't let rage cloud my judgment. Greedy people rush. I wouldn't. I would move with the patience and precision of an old man setting a trap. Thomas Vance's law office sat in the heart of New Canaan, inside an old but dignified building. Thomas was an old friend. Quiet, careful, trustworthy. Grant is trying to take control of everything, Thomas, I told him. My voice was steady, but bitterness lived underneath. He's trying to forge my signature. Worse, he's trying to seize assets while his mother is lying on her deathbed. I need you to protect Eleanor. Not just her assets, her legacy. We spent the entire morning reviewing every clause of the irrevocable family trust Eleanor and I had created. Where Grant only saw numbers, we saw fine print, gaps, conditions we had written more than 10 years ago, conditions Grant in his blind confidence would overlook. Thomas sighed. His eyes showed both sympathy and respect. You know your son well, George. The best revenge isn't anger. It's precision. We'll amend the trust codicil immediately, but we'll need more evidence. Evidence. That was what brought me home. Our large Tudor-style house on the outskirts of New Canaan, once filled with Eleanor's laughter, now painfully silent. I went straight to my wife's study. Minimalist, warm, exactly the way she loved it. I remembered her words. George, if anything happens to me, use key 45A. I found it inside an old keepsake box. A simple metal key crudely stamped with 45A. Not a bank key. Then I remembered a few weeks earlier Eleanor had mentioned a painting she had just bought. It hung right there in the study, an abstract piece, blue and white tones. I took it down. Behind it, just as I expected, was a compact electronic wall safe, recessed deep into the wall. Key 45A was the manual emergency override. When the safe opened, I found two things: an aged leather journal and a USB drive labeled in Eleanor's familiar handwriting, the grand plan. My hands trembled as I opened the journal. It wasn't about money. It was Eleanor's painful record of Grant. She had seen the change in our son long ago. November 12th. Today, Grant asked me how to sell the sanctuary farm. He didn't ask about memories. He didn't ask about its history. He asked about demolition. My heart broke. That boy is no longer our son George. He is a traitor, and we are a commodity. Reading her words, I finally understood her struggle. She hadn't been betrayed only in that hospital bed. She had carried this betrayal in silence for months. My anger softened into a deep, aching grief. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. This was our fight. I plugged the USB drive into the computer, encrypted files, legal documents, and most importantly, video evidence. Then my phone rang. Head nurse Amelia, from the ICU. Mr. Sterling, I think you need to come back. Mrs. Eleanor. She made a small movement. When I returned to the ICU, Amelia pulled me aside. Her face was tense, but resolute. Mr. Sterling, I know I shouldn't interfere with family matters, but I heard them. I heard what your son said. They're talking about selling all the furniture Mrs. Eleanor designed. They want to dismantle the very room she spent her life creating. That truth hardened my resolve. And this is the most important part, Amelia said, lowering her voice. When I spoke to Mrs. Eleanor about how she always wanted to install home security cameras but never finished, she blinked. Once, just once, she may be able to communicate with eye blinks when specific topics are mentioned. I can't do this officially, but you can try. My heart pounded. That fragile form of communication was hope. I stepped closer to Eleanor's bed. I took her hand. Cold. So cold. I looked into her nearly closed eyes. Eleanor, I said softly, calmly, I found key 45 A. I read your journal. I know what Grant and Chloe have been doing. Do they know about the grand plan you hid on the USB drive? I waited. The heart monitor blinked steadily. 10 seconds passed, like an eternity. Then I saw it. Her right eyelid, barely noticeable, blinked once. That silent confirmation was everything. My wife was with me. She was listening, and she wanted me to fight. I had the evidence. I had allies. And most importantly, I had the permission of the woman I loved to carry out the grand plan. Grant and Chloe had no idea what was coming for them. Eleanor's silent confirmation turned my pain and disappointment into something sharper. A cold, steady resolve. I knew Grant would move fast. He was a finance professional, and in his eyes, his own mother was nothing more than a depreciating asset, one that needed to be liquidated quickly. I sat in my study, the USB labeled, the grand plan, plugged into my computer. Encrypted files slowly unlocked, one by one. The room was so quiet, I could hear the wind brushing against the windows. I went through every transaction Grant had made. What I found wasn't just greed. It was desperation. Inside the encrypted video files, there was a recorded Zoom call, an argument between Grant and a former business partner from 6 months earlier. Grant had taken $850,000 from my company, my old architecture firm, money I believed he was managing responsibly, and gambled it on a high-risk stock investment. I need $850,000 within 48 hours, Grant shouted in the video, his face pale. I'll replace it. My mother, she'll give me early access to my inheritance. That old house, it's worth several times that. He wasn't just greedy. He was a reckless gambler trying to use Eleanor's assets to cover his failure. His goal wasn't to become richer. It was to avoid exposure and total collapse. That realization hurt more than watching him try to steal her ring. He was willing to sell his soul just to keep up appearances. Just as I expected. 2 days later, Grant made his move. He called me, his voice thick with fake concern. He said he had found a potential buyer for the sanctuary farm, the land and old house Eleanor and I bought as a retreat, the place that held all of Grant's childhood memories. It was valued at $5 million and held inside the irrevocable family trust. Dad, they're ready to put down a deposit of $500,000 right now. We need the money for Mom's medical bills. You see, I'm helping you. He went even further. He arranged a private showing for real estate investors. Right inside that house, claiming authority by forging my signature on a temporary authorization document. I knew this because Thomas had people quietly watching his every move. That was when I decided the performance was over. I called for a small meeting. Not at home, at Thomas's law office. Grant, Chloe, and me. The air was suffocating. Only the soft rustle of paper could be heard. Grant, I began, my voice low and even completely expressionless. You said you wanted to sell the sanctuary to cover your mother's medical expenses. You believe that's a good idea? Grant lifted his chin, smug confidence returning. Of course, Dad. I'm thinking about the family. Then you're going to be very surprised to learn that you have no right to sell it, I said, locking eyes with him. Grant scoffed a short, careless laugh. Dad, it's a family asset. I'm the direct heir after Mom. You can't decide this on your own. That's true, I replied, nodding slowly. But you missed one thing. The sanctuary isn't just inherited property. It's an irrevocable trust, and your mother and I placed a very specific condition on it. I paused. Any heir who wishes to take ownership must live on and personally manage the farm for at least 5 years to preserve its historical and emotional value. That was your mother's idea. Grant, you've lived in New York for the past 7 years. The color drained from his face. Chloe looked at him, suspicion flashing in her eyes. But what does that mean? Grant stammered. Thomas Vance slid a folder across the table. It means your attempt to sell the property is illegal, Grant. And it gets worse. 2 weeks before Mrs. Eleanor fell ill, she and George signed a formal document transferring trust management to a single entity. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. It's called the Sterling Family Farm Preservation Foundation, a nonprofit your mother secretly created to protect that place from people like you. She saw your greed coming. Silence fell over the room. This wasn't a victory. It was a painful exposure. Chloe reacted first, turning on Grant in fury. You told me everything was fine. You promised me a new Porsche. Grant exploded, his composure completely gone panic, spilling out. Dad, You're trying to destroy me. I need that money. What do you need it for, Grant? I asked, my voice ice cold. To repay the $850,000 you lost from my old company. Gambling on risky stocks without permission. Or to pay off your former partner, the one you promised money from your mother's early inheritance. I placed the USB drive on the table and played the video on the large screen. Grant's face. Chloe's face. Frozen terror. Financial shock. Moral collapse. Your goal was never to save your mother, Grant, I said quietly. Your goal was to save yourself from ruin. That's why your mother called this the grand plan. He broke. In that room he knew every door had closed. His greedy scheme was fully exposed. No escape left. But I wasn't finished. I still had to give him one final choice, a trade more painful than loss itself. Grant and Chloe stood frozen, not from fear, but from public humiliation. The video of Grant's argument kept playing on the screen, clear proof of financial fraud and raw desperation. Inside that elegant law office, every polished mask they had worked so hard to build collapsed completely. Chloe broke the silence first. She didn't look at me. She stared at Grant, her eyes burning with rage and disgust. You told me you had it under control, she snapped. You said it was just a short-term investment. She didn't care about Eleanor. She didn't care about betrayal. She only cared that her luxury lifestyle was now under threat. Grant stammered, scrambling for excuses. Dad, you don't understand. I lost, yes, but I can fix it. I just need time. You can't do this to me. I looked at my son. In that moment, he didn't look like a criminal mastermind. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the jam jar. The rage inside me was gone. All that remained was cold ash and sorrow. You crossed a line, Grant, I said, each word slow and deliberate. You tried to deceive your mother while she lies unconscious. You deceived your father, and you deceived yourself. You sold your soul to save face. And to your mother. That is unforgivable. Grant tried one last time to appeal to emotion. Mom is in the ICU, Dad. Medical costs will reach into the millions. Drop the lawsuit. I'll take care of her. I promise I'll send her to the best rehab facility. I'll stay by her side. You'll do that. I interrupted, my voice heavy with irony. But only if there's money involved. Isn't that right? I stood up and walked to the small speaker I had placed on the desk before the meeting began. I had recorded this entire conversation. I played it back. Their own greedy voices filled the room. Then I turned it off. I don't need empty promises, Grant, I said quietly. And your mother doesn't need them either. I told them about the moment Eleanor cried in the ICU, when I told her the truth, when I told her her son only wanted money. My voice cracked. It was the only moment that day when I let emotion overpower reason. Even while lying motionless, your mother is listening, and you hurt her more deeply than any illness ever could. The emotional confrontation was over. Now came the financial reality. Thomas Vance placed a new folder on the table. Its title read, Unconditional Settlement Agreement. This is the final option, Thomas said. It is attached to the trust amendment George has already signed. It is the solution for Grant's urgent personal debt of $850,000. Grant's eyes lit up uncontrollably. He was ready to sell anything. I removed a pre-signed check from the folder. The amount was written clearly. $2,500,000 US. This is your early inheritance, Grant, I said, sliding the check across the table. The amount was enough to clear his debt, stabilize his career, and leave a large surplus. He stared at it, as if he couldn't believe it was real. In return, I continued emphasizing every word. You and Chloe will sign this document. It permanently renounces any remaining inheritance rights from Eleanor, from the trust, and from my personal estate in the future, forever. This is a trade. You take $2.5 million now to save your career, but you give up many millions more you might have received later. It was the perfect psychological trap. A greedy, desperate man will always choose a large, guaranteed sum now over a greater but uncertain future reward. Chloe leaned in and whispered to Grant, calculating fast. Grant, sign it. $2.5 million is more than enough for us to start over in California. Your parents could live for decades. You can't wait that long. Her pressure was the final lever. Grant looked at me. His eyes were filled with hatred, but he knew this was his only escape from immediate ruin. He would rather be known as a son who walked away than a man who lost his money and his status. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. The moment he signed the inheritance waiver, I felt a pain deeper than any betrayal before. It was the final confirmation that to Grant, the bond between father and son was nothing more than a financial transaction, one that could be canceled. I pushed the check toward him. "Congratulations, Grant," I said. "This is money for you to start a new life, not to end your mother's." "No, thank you. No remorse." Grant grabbed the check and stood up. Chloe followed immediately, completely ignoring me. I remained seated in the office, staring at the signed agreement. I had won, but it felt like I had lost something essential. A son. It was a painful victory, but a necessary one. Eleanor's legacy was protected, and yet I knew the grand plan still had one final step left, one last arrangement. Fairer and far more satisfying for those watching. After Grant and Chloe walked out with the $2.5 million check, without looking back, silence filled the law office. It wasn't the silence of victory. It was the silence of an ending. I had severed one relationship, my own flesh and blood, to protect another, my bond with Eleanor and the values we built together. Thomas looked at me. I think he could see how drained I was. "Are you all right, George? That couldn't have been easy." "I'm all right, Thomas," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "I did what had to be done. Now, let's talk about the final step of the grand plan." The new codicil I had signed was a perfect shield. Grant took the money, and in exchange he personally destroyed every future claim he might have had. He chose immediate cash over family. 2 weeks later, hope finally came from St. Jude Hospital. Dr. Julian Vance, Eleanor's neurologist, asked me into his office. The lighting there was softer than the harsh fluorescent glow of the ICU. "George, we've seen significant improvement," Dr. Vance said carefully. "Eleanor can now move her right index finger on command. She still has a long road ahead. But this is no longer a coma. We should be able to transfer her to a specialized rehabilitation center within a few weeks." I hadn't cried through all of this, but at that moment hot tears ran down my face. They were tears of release, of hope. Eleanor had won. Her recovery, even at this early stage, proved that Grant and Chloe's actions had been cruel and meaningless. She hadn't passed early the way they had counted on. Soon after, I carried out the final step of the grand plan, the one Eleanor and I had quietly prepared long ago. It was something Grant never considered, because he only ever saw material wealth. I organized a small ceremony at the sanctuary farm, not to sell it, but to formally transfer its stewardship to the Sterling Family Farm Preservation Foundation, Eleanor's nonprofit. At that gathering, I announced the true purpose of the trust. It would establish the Eleanor Sterling Scholarship Fund, supporting underprivileged students, pursuing nursing and patient care. Before she became an interior designer, Eleanor had been a devoted nurse. She always wanted to give back. Present that day were Thomas, Dr. Vance, head nurse Amelia, and my second child, my daughter Sarah. Sarah was the only one I had kept completely out of the conflict and the new will. She was a teacher living in another state, a daughter with no greed, and a heart full of love for her mother. As I spoke about the scholarship, I paused and looked directly at Sarah. She was wiping away tears, moved by her mother's legacy. "And there is one final thing," I said, my voice echoing across the quiet farm. "In the original will, the one Grant signed away, there was a clause he never bothered to read carefully." I paused again. "If a child voluntarily renounces their inheritance, that portion is automatically transferred to the second child, the only one who never asked about the value of the estate, but asked about her mother's health." I turned to Sarah. Her eyes widened in shock. "Sarah," I said gently, "Grant gave up an inheritance worth many millions in exchange for $2.5 million up front to save his career. Under your mother's terms, the remaining assets, stocks, savings, and personal property now belong to you. Not as a gift," I added, "but as fairness, as the legacy of kindness." Sarah broke down in tears, not because of money, but because she finally felt the quiet, unconditional love her parents had always held for her. She looked at me, then toward the distance, where Eleanor would soon begin her recovery. I sat beside Eleanor in her new rehabilitation room. It was warmer, gentler, nothing like the ICU. I turned on the camera, not to record in secret, but to speak directly to you, the ones listening to this story. I held Eleanor's wedding ring in my hand. I won the legal battle. But I lost a son, I said to the camera. That is the truth. But I protected Eleanor, and everything she stood for. I didn't choose to take everything from Grant. I gave him a financial exit. I let him choose to strip himself of the rest. I leaned down and kissed Eleanor's forehead. She looked at me, and I saw it, a fragile smile, faint, wrinkled, but real. I turned back to the camera. True legacy isn't the value of houses or the balance in a bank account. It's the values you carve into your children's souls. I let them sign their own judgment, and I hope that one day Grant will understand that. Thank you for listening to my family's story. I turned the camera off. I didn't get a perfect ending. There was no miracle reconciliation. But I had the truth. I had peace, and I had Eleanor. And to me, that is the most valuable legacy of all. I hope this story leaves you with one lesson. That betrayal can fracture a family, but it cannot destroy a legacy built on kindness and love. If this emotional story touched you, please like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep stories about family and justice. Thank you for listening to my confession.